Alright guys, officially the military drills of CSTO organization, that's the common military organization with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Tajikistan, Armenia by the way, so those drills have been started in Belarus, officially open. However, the main part of the drills will go from 12th till 16th of September, where Belarus officials even say that they might try to use Oreshnik ballistic missiles supplied to them by Russia. Well, there is no real confirmation of those supplies happened, but it might be during those military drills actually, because Russia sends lots of the forces to Belarus. And today let's speak about the possible threats which those military drills could carry for Ukraine as well as for NATO members. Okay, this picture was taken well before and it's not the Ukrainian one. You can see the red stripe out there. It's the Armenian flag and Armenia is not taking part into this year's military drills. However, the rest of the countries are presented at least at the initial stage of those drills, which is already kind of the good sign, because I don't think that, for example, Kazakhstan will start military action against NATO countries or Ukraine as the part of this military bloc with Russia. No, they'll refuse. However, as it happened in 2022, Russian forces could stay in Belarus territory and expand those military drills for several more weeks. They also might place their extra weapons as an excuse using military drills, Zapad 2025. Even the name Zapad, which means West, is kind of strange for those drills. Well, officially the plan of the training is to fight sabotage groups which are coming from the Western countries or Ukraine. But why should they need thousands of the troops and nuclear weapons in this case? Or at least devices which could carry nuclear warheads, Oreshnik, Iskander missiles, they will be used in those drills. The exact amount of the joint forces of Belarus, Russia plus other countries is yet unknown. But according to convention which was taken in Wien in 2011, if the number is more than 13,000 troops, the border states should be informed about it. But back in 2022, did Russia or Belarus inform Ukraine or NATO members about the huge Russian military group of 90,000 soldiers in Belarus territory who later on intervened into Ukraine? No, absolutely not. And by the way, lots of the local commanders plus Russian soldiers, they really thought that they are still in military drills, that they are going to Ukraine as the part of some sort of the cooperation. And only after shooting started, they understood that, oh, it's the war. 1 month ago, there were numerous reports of the Western intelligence that Russia could potentially deploy up to 100,000 soldiers to those military drills in Belarus, which are ongoing or has been started. But I don't think that this figure is real. Russia bogged down in Ukraine and they really need infantry forces as well as armored vehicles and so on. Yeah, Russian army still has capabilities and kind of the big resources compared to Ukraine or Belarus, for example. But just right now, fighting against NATO countries, I don't think Russia is capable really for that. But knowing Putin's craziness, he might perform any sort of the step, including possible provocations during the military drills. For sure, they will use some of the drones which could accidentally fly to the NATO airspace. NATO in this case might show its weaknesses, not shutting down the drones, or maybe they could launch interceptors, aviation to shut down the drone, which could lead also to escalation. That's the story of the Broken Arrow game actually, a strategic game which was released a few months ago where they spoke actually about this possible scenario during the military drills in Suwalki corridor between NATO and Russia, which led to the major war. But after all, with Russia busy in Ukraine, I don't think that this full-scale war is really possible, but provocations, yeah, those could be. And we also know that at the same time, the Western countries will perform their military drills at the border with Belarus. Roughly 40,000 troops could be used in those trainings in Baltics and in Poland during the Zapad, Russian or Belarus drills, let's call them like that. So 16,000 forces will be stationed in Lithuania. By the way, Lithuania is building some of the extra barricades on its border By the time I am recording this video, they're doing it right now. Yeah, lots of the cones, dragon teeth, trenches, they're digging. And in 2021, Zapad exercise, which started in autumn and later on went to the full-scale war in 2022, Russia used 200,000 troops as claimed before, and part of those forces were sent to Ukraine. But this year, absolutely, there will be no 200,000 forces deployed, but we should wait what might happen after the military drills are over, and whether Russians could stay on Ukrainian territory with their military infrastructure. Because, for example, after Russia moved their forces from Kiev Oblast, from Chernigiv, they retreated their group from Belarus and sent all of the forces to the eastern and to the southern part of Ukraine. So then the training is over. If we see Russian forces stationary in Belarus, it means that Russia is getting ready for some of the provocation. Could be against Ukraine or could be against the Baltic countries, so we don't know with the modern-day Russia. Because logically, why should they keep their forces in Belarus by the time they eagerly need those in the eastern front lines? Yeah, sometimes logic and the Russian management have nothing in common, but at least from my perspective, I think it's the stupid idea to leave the forces in Belarus if you don't want to use them by the time you need them here on the front lines. So the situation might look like in 2021, 2022, then Russia was preparing for the major strike. They were building some of the military infrastructure on Belarus territory to further attack Ukraine. Lots of the bases, fuel tanks, but still their supplies were kind of weak and their offensive failed because mainly of their logistics. Also, one more interesting thing, this year Russia plans to use the same brigades and regiments which it used during the attack on Ukraine in 2022. For now it looks like copy-paste, but with less forces available for Russia and a little more forces available for Belarus, because Belarus expanded its army from 45,000 to 60 with something thousand. So let's go back to official numbers which Belarus declared for their neighbors. There will be 12,700 soldiers, which is obvious lie. But about the rest, it could be real, so 300 tanks, yeah, it's possible, and it is a big number. 500 of the infantry fighting and infantry carrying vehicles, and roughly 250 artillery systems. Plus numerous of the supply vehicles like route trucks, KAMAZ, which you may see on the screen. But unofficially, the number of the troops could reach up to 100,000 soldiers, mostly Russians with support of Belarus. As one more possible variant, Putin may plan some of the provocation during the military drills to drag Belarus in war against Ukraine. Clearly, it was the dream of Putin since the start of the war, and partially it was achieved because Belarus territory was used to attack Ukraine, but Belarus army is not officially in this war. Belarus soldiers are not fighting in Ukraine. And I would say that those dictators, they have strange relationship. Lukashenko understands that this war is not profitable for his leadership at all, and there is the chance for his power collapse in the country, even. Because Belarus people, they see what is happening in Ukraine, they read Telegram channels, they know about the losses, and no one wants that in their own country. Yeah, they live in dictatorship, but the average Belarus citizen understands the situation way better compared to the Russian one. Because after all, Belarus is the small and fully European country, it has close tie connections with its neighbors, even with the European Union and obviously Ukraine. That's why people see more vivid and real picture. And that creates the huge threat for Lukashenko as dictator of Belarus if he starts this war. It could be an unpredictable movement for him. That's why he tries to avoid this scenario. What he agreed on with Putin is to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus. That's why Putin is partially happy. But I'm sure that still scenario of dragging Belarus into the war against Ukraine is on the FSB table in Russia. Mostly Belarus is not that interesting from its military army perspective. I mean, military personnel, they have, as I say to you, 60 with something thousand troops, and they absolutely do not have motivation to fight against Ukraine. They also do not have the proper training and military experience. Yes, the Wagner training camp was there just for the show, nothing more. And that camp lasted for a few months until Prigozhin was caputed by Putin. The Belarus itself is more interesting for Putin from the logistics perspective, supplies, military bases, and potential to produce weapons. And by the way, fuel, because Belarus has some of the refineries which are quite big. For now, partially those refineries are working for Russia, but Putin wants to gain the full control. His dream is actually to turn Belarus to one more oblast of Russia and to become its president. There were even some steps made by Lukashenko and Yeltsin to create some sort of the country, Belarus-Russia. And Lukashenko supported that because he thought that he could be a president of that country, joint country, Russia and Belarus. But no, he was outplayed by Russia. If there are some of the provocations in the northern side of Ukrainian army will have to send lots of the reinforcements. By the time Ukraine is deepened into the crisis of the lack of the army men, troops, and other resources. And you cannot hire and mobilize 100,000 soldiers per day. No, you need extended period of time. Many weeks of training at least are required. And for this reason, again, I do not exclude provocations at the border. But it also could be at the NATO border, depends on the political goals of Russia and Belarus in this case. As announced by Belarus, the main part of the military drills will go in Baryshal. It's not far away from Minsk. But it's not that close to the NATO border and to Ukrainian one, but Belarus itself is kind of the small country, well, comparably small. Plus it has good road connections. I was in Belarus myself, as well as in Russia, so I may compare the roads. The roads in Belarus are just awesome in most of the cases, and the network is even more developed compared to, for example, this part of Lithuania near Vilnius. Here you see way more roads, which could be used for the fast transportation of the military equipment. But what Belarus announced as the main point for military drills could not be true, as well as they faked the information about the number of the forces or the troops which could be involved in the military exercise, as well as they lied about it in 2021. The real picture only could be understandable during the main part of the military exercise. Of course, NATO will use surveillance airplanes and satellites to confirm the location of the Russian and Belarus forces. It seems like Ukraine is really concerned about it because roughly 10 days ago there was the statement from the Ukrainian foreign minister about the planned military exercises in the territory of the Republic of Belarus. Ukraine officials warned the Belarus side against possible provocations. But for dictatorship countries it basically means nothing. What I can also say about this topic, there are lots of the experts in internet. Some of them are panicking about the possible war against NATO, that it will happen this year during those military drills. Other experts say that no, everything is usual. They conduct those military drills like every year. Mainly there are two of those opposing opinions, but I would stay somewhere in the middle. Yes, it is definitely a threat. But whether it's gonna be a full-scale war against NATO or against Ukraine, I don't think so. It could create potential provocations. And our NATO allies plus Ukraine should monitor the situation very closely. As well as I'm gonna monitor it with you because this topic is very important after all. And guys, please check out my channel for the latest videos I filmed, some of the kabooms in Crimea and update from the front lines. In Ukraine, we have, by the way, some of the good news, and there are coming more good news. I'm gonna update you about those tomorrow morning, I hope. And many thanks for my Patreon supporters. My friends, you make this content possible. The link for my Patreon is in the video description just below. My friends, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.